Right, welcome back. So up to this point, we've been able to make some requests in the last video that we just did. If you haven't checked it out, just go ahead and check out how we implement this CRUD functionality on our views. So we have been able to make the requests, but one thing you probably notice is the client was able to make these requests, and these requests were not actually authenticated, or were not secured rather. Right, so for you to be able to secure it, Django REST framework comes with a cool feature that we can actually go ahead and use to authenticate our requests. Right, so what we need to do here is we just need to add something called permission classes in our views. So in this case, we have the customer view, and we also have the customer detail view. Right, so in both of these views we need to add permission classes. Right, so the permission classes, what it does is it actually takes a tuple, right, a tuple of some couple of permissions. Right, so in this case the permission that we're going to use is authenticated. Right, so let's quickly go ahead and bring it in. Right, so we're going to say from REST framework, right, dot permissions, from REST framework dot permissions, like so, import is authenticated, like so. Right, so once we have imported this is authenticated from the REST framework permissions, we need to actually go ahead and implement it in the views. Right, so to implement it, you just need to say permission, right, permission classes, right, then you put your tuple. Right, so inside this tuple, this is where you need to put the permissions. Right, so in this case simply need to put permissions classes is authenticated. Right, so what this means is every time I hit an endpoint or a URL with this view called customer view, right, the requests are supposed to be authenticated. So what do you mean by authentication? So before I explain it, let me just quickly go ahead and do it to the second view, right, the customer detail view. Right, so up to this point now we now have both of our views authenticated. Right, so before I explain how we do it, let's just quickly go ahead and test this out to see if these two endpoints are now secured. So let's quickly go ahead and open a new terminal. Right, make sure that your server is running. Right, so open a new terminal. So remember we need to make our get request. Right, so in this case I'm simply going to say curl http, right, localhost 8000 /API /customers. Right, so this is just a get request that I'm just hitting. Right, so as you can see from the response, right, we are now getting a 403, right, a forbidden error, which means authentication credentials were not provided. Right, so which means we need to put some authorization header with a token in our requests, in our get request. Right, so how you do it, right, for you to be able to authenticate, right, remember you need to do a couple of configurations in our settings. Right, so the first configuration that we probably need to do here is we need to okay, so before I do that, let me just explain what we are trying to do here. Right, so as you can see, it's now saying authentication credentials were not provided. Right, so what this means is Django REST frameworks comes with a token based mechanism, right, for authenticating and authorizing our access to these secure endpoints. Right, so for you to be able to actually go ahead and obtain a token, because what it means is you need to actually provide a token to our requests header. We need to provide a token that comes from the Django REST framework. So for you to do that, the first thing that we need to add, right, inside the settings.py under installed apps, we need to add from REST, we need to add REST framework we need to add something called auth token. Right, so this is a new change. Right, so this is the first thing that we need to add. Right, auth token. Right, so once you have added this package, right, the next thing that you probably need to add is you need to add something called authentication token token authentication, right? So let me just do it. So you need to say REST framework. So this is now a REST framework configuration that you need to do, right? So we need to say REST framework, right? Then inside this, right, we're going to provide default authentication, because remember we're using the permission classes, right, in our authentication in our views, right? So authentication, we need to implement a permission class, right? So with this permission class it's a list that take these permission classes, right? So the one that we need to implement is called REST framework dot authentication, right, dot, then the class is called token authentication, like so, right? So once you have implemented this permission class, right, it actually means that we are now able to actually go ahead and obtain our token, right? Because the token that we need to obtain, we need to actually go ahead and obtain a token. So you cannot obtain the token unless you have made these two configurations. Let's just quickly go ahead to our server so there are no errors, so which means our spellings are correct here. So now what after you have made this change, right, one thing that you need to remember to do is you need to run your migrations, right? So you need to say manage.py migrate, right, like so. So once you have run your migrations, I think I had run them before, but basically it's supposed to implement these settings here, right? Because it actually go ahead and create some authentication tables inside your database, right? So once you have run your migrations, right, the next thing that we probably need to do here is we now need to actually go ahead and create an account, right? So remember from the last video, I had created an admin account. If you haven't, just quickly go ahead and run manage.py create super user, right? Then you create your account. So I've already created an admin account, because for us to be able to obtain a token, right, you need to have an account, right? So to obtain a token, right, Django comes with a command that that is called drf_create_token, right? So this command will allow us to actually go ahead and obtain or generate a token, right? So let's quickly go ahead and do that. So inside my visual environment, I'm going to say manage.py, right? Then I'm going to run the command called drf_create_token, right? Then you put the name of the account or the name of the user that would have created. So in this case, I created a user called admin. So let's try to generate a token, right? Boom. So after this is done, you can actually see that the REST framework has generated a token. This is the token that it is generated for this user admin, right? So at this point, let me just go ahead and copy this token, right? Because I now want to make my get request, right? So what this means now that the client has this token, right? So what it means is in the next time I'm going to make a request to the server, I should be able to provide this authorization token inside my inside my request header, right? So let's quickly go ahead and do that. So I've copied the token. So let's go back to curl, right? So in this case, I'm simply going to say, right, curl, right? So at the end here, I'm going to put a header section, right? Because we need to put an authorization token, right? So I'm simply going to say authorization, right? Then I put a full colon, right? So remember, to put the token, you need to put it together with a keyword called token, because if you don't put this keyword token, it will be rejected by the Django REST framework, right? So this is how we do it. So we're simply putting an authorization header with a token, and then I just simply pasted the token that we have generated, right? So now let's try to get to perform our get request again. All right, so as you probably can see now, we are now actually able to make our requests. And then since there are no users, remember in the last video we had created a user and then we deleted that customer, so that's why it's returning an empty list. So as you can see, we no longer have the error authentication credentials are not provided, this 403, right? So which means the token that we just created is working just fine. All right. So after this stage now, so what do you want to do, right? So as you can probably notice, is from this stage now, this works just fine, right? But one of the downfall with this approach is, what if our client want to actually go ahead and make some subsequent requests? Let's say they're working from the React app from the front end, and they want to actually go ahead and make some subsequent requests. So we can't actually go ahead and make them manually generate these tokens, or maybe give them an account from the Django admin and then generate the token, because they can actually go ahead and generate these tokens without using while it's using the Django admin. But we're not going to do that for now. We're simply going to use the command that we just did. So we can't make our clients do that, right? So one way we can do that is Django, the REST framework, it actually comes with a view that can actually go ahead and make life easier for us, right? So the view that we can use is called obtain authentic token, right? So let me go ahead and implement that view. So just go ahead to the URLs, right? So the URL, so you need to implement a view called API token auth, right? So all right, so let me remove this. We didn't have this before. So before we get something like this, I was just messing it around. So this is the code that we have up to now. So let's quickly go together. So the view that you need to implement is called, so it's, let's quickly implement the new view, right? So the view is called API. So this is just the URL endpoint name, token UTH, right? And then the view. So before I implement the view, let me simply go ahead and import the view. So I'm going to say from REST framework, right? So from REST framework dot auth token import views, right? Import views like this, right? And then the token that I need to the view that we now need to hit, that actually be able to make the client be able to generate the token, is called obtain, right? It's called obtain underscore AUTH underscore token, like so, right? So this is the view that and the endpoint that our client is supposed to hit, right? So one thing that you need to notice about this view is this view, it only accepts the only post request, right? So what it means is the client would have to provide their credentials for them to be able to generate this token, right? So what it means is the client has to make a post request with their credentials, mainly the username and the password. So once they've provided those two details and hit this request, it will actually generate the token for them. So let's quickly simulate the client now, right? So our server is still running. So let me clear my terminal. So I'm simply going to make a post request, right? I'm assuming that I'm working maybe from React, maybe I'm using Axios or anything, any other front end HTTP client, right? So in this case, I'm using curl, right? So we need to provide the data. So in this case, the username of the client, remember the account that they've created, it's called, it had the username called admin, right? Then the password, right? The password that I created was admin123, right? Right. Then we want to make, so this is a client with an account now making a post request so that they'll be able to obtain the token, right? So the request type, this is going to be a post request, right? And then the post request, we're simply going to hit it to localhost, right? Localhost 8000/API/ then we put this name of the endpoint token AUTH/, like so, right? Then hit enter. So it's now returning a 403. So let's see, it means there's something wrong with my endpoint. Okay, there's a / at the end here. I forgot to put /. All right, so let's put a /, then you save. Right, and let's do it again. All right, so as you can see, the client now has generated a token, right? So up to this point, the client can now actually be able, for example, if they're using React or if they're using AngularJS or Vue, they can actually go ahead and now save this token, for example, in local storage or in session cookies, so that they'll be able to make subsequent requests using this token, right? So this is it. So up to this stage now, we can actually see that now both of our views, the get customers by ID and then the customers view, they are both now are secured, right? Which means you need to provide an authorization token to be able to hit the endpoints, right? So this is fine. So this works just fine for an API, but one of the downfall with this approach now is even though it works just fine, but we need some way of actually managing our tokens, right? For example, if you're using cookies, let's say in React, there's a way that you can actually go ahead and manage your cookies. You know, you can give them the expiry time, you can do some configuration like giving them the HTTP only or HTTPS only, so that they won't be accessed by the JavaScript or run the, there's some sort of security that you can provide to your token. But at this stage, this is just a one-time token that you can actually go ahead and use. Then you can, if you want to use another token, you'll have to regenerate another token manually or automatically, and then this token, it's okay, but the token itself is not actually secured, right? So one thing that we can actually go ahead and make our authorization token even better is by using JSON Web Tokens, right? So with JSON Web Tokens, it actually provides you with a token that is more stronger or more powerful than this, because you can actually go ahead and set some expiration time to your token, the time that the token will lapse and stuff like that. So you have more control to your token over this REST framework token, right? So in the next section, we now want to implement the authorization using the JSON Web Token, and then the package that we're going to use is called Django Restframework-SimpleJWT, the one that we've installed in the first video. So see you in the next one. All right, welcome back. So up to this point, we've been using the REST token for authorization. All right, so while this works just fine, there's actually another excellent way that we can use to achieve this that is more secure when transmitting information between two parties, that is using the JWT or the JSON Web Token, right? So one of the advantages of using a JSON Web Token or over a bare token is because the information can be verified and trusted between two parties, because with JSON Web Tokens, these tokens, they are digitally signed, right? Which means they can be signed with a secret key, specifically they run an HMark algorithm or a public key pair using the RSA algorithm to actually encrypt these tokens, right? So we are not going to dive deep into JSON Web Tokens, but you can actually go ahead and check out the JSON Web Token website so that you can get more information of this. So with the simple JSON Web Token, right, that we installed, right, it actually uses the JSON Web Tokens. So basically the structure of a JSON Web Token, right, is something like this, right? It will give you a token that is something like this, yy, right, .zz, right? Right, so it will give you a 32-bit encoded string, right, with XS, YY, and ZZ, right? So this will be just one token as compared to this one, which is just one string. So which means it's more powerful. So what it means is the JSON Web Token is actually divided into these three sections, right? Where the first section, this one is the header, right? So this is the header. So I'm just going to do a little bit of lecturing. And then the second part is then the payload. Then the last part is the signature, right? So what it means is in the header typically consists of two parts, right? The first part, which is the type of the token, right? In this case, it's called the JWT, since we're using the JSON Web Token. And the second part is the algorithm. So basically this part is encrypted. If you decrypt this string, this 32-bit encoded string, you come up with something like this, right? It will give you something like this with then maybe an algorithm that says maybe whatever the algorithm that was used, right? So for example, H256, right? This is an encoding algorithm. Then the type, then it will give you a type field like this, right? So there's no E, so a type field like this. then the type of the token JWT, right? So if you decrypt this encrypted header, it will give you something like this, a JSON an object like this, right? And same applies with the payload. So basically the payload, it also has an object that contains the token type, the expiration date, then the user ID and stuff like that. So basically the payload, it actually carries the data, right? For example, the user information, the username, the password, the user ID, anything. So it's just the payload. It actually carries the actual data, right? So your actual data will be encrypted into this, for example, the user ID, for example, right? And then the last section contains now the signature. So basically what the signature does is the JSON web tokens, it encodes, right, the header, right, and then the payload to come up with this, right? So it adds a base64 URL that is encoded, the header plus this one to give this one. So with these three features, of using the header, the payload, and then the signature, you actually come up with a more powerful token that we can actually go ahead and use over the browser. And also another advantage of using JSON web tokens, like what we've mentioned earlier, is we can actually transmit data using the token. For example, with this token, we can transmit data over it. But with the JSON web token, we can put some user information in the payload, right? But this information will be encrypted, right, with these algorithms. So that's why a JSON web token is much more powerful than this, right? So with that said, now let's quickly go ahead and implement the JSON web token using SimpleJWT, right? So what you need to do is you need to add, so you need to go ahead and go to our settings, right? Settings.py, right? So inside this REST framework, this is where we need to put some authentication classes for our JSON web token, right? So let's quickly go ahead and do that, right? So the first authentication class, the authentication class that we need to put is called REST. We're going to take it from REST framework, right? Underscore simple. So remember the package that we installed is called SimpleJWT. So simple JSON web token, right? Dot authentication. So the reason why we're using simple JSON web token is because that's the framework for tokens that is recommended by the REST framework, right? So REST framework actually recommends the simple JWT. So that's why we're using that one, right? So then the class that we actually need, the permission class, is called JWT. So just like what we did with the REST framework, we simply do the same thing with the JSON web token authentication, right? Like so, right? So so once this is done, I think we are done with this configuration, right? So let me go ahead and navigate to my server, right? There are no errors, so everything is fine, right? Then the next thing that we probably need to do is we now need to add our URLs, right? Because, right, remember, we need a way to actually make our client be able to obtain this JSON web token, just like what we did with the REST framework token, right? So if you go back to the URLs, right, remember we added this API token that can produce this REST framework token, right? But in this case, we now want to be able to obtain, we now want a way to actually make our client able to obtain a JSON web token, right? So how do you do that? So the JSON, the simple JWT comes with a view called token obtain per view, right? And a token refresh view, right? So we're going to talk about them in a minute. So let's just simply go ahead and import them for now. So from, right? So from REST framework underscore simple JWT dot views, right? Import. Right. So in this case, we want to import two views. The first one is called token obtain per view, right? So this view is the one that will allow us to actually go ahead and obtain our token. So what this does is if you hit this view, it returns a token with the access token and something called a refresh token. I think we'll talk about that. Then another view that we need to do is called token refresh view, right? So what this view does is it actually allows us to actually refresh, or for example, if our access token is expired, we can actually go ahead and renew that token using this token refresh view, right? So under our path right here, let's go ahead and add the two views, right? So the endpoints that we need to add, the first one is called token, right? So if our clients is this token, they'll actually be able to hit the token obtain per view, since it's a class is underscore view, right? Like so. Then the name of this view, I'm going to name it let's say token obtain per. So the reason why we're naming it is, for example, if you now want to resolve this URL, we can simply use the name. I think we'll see about resolving URLs when you are now looking at unit testing, right? Then the second path that we need for refresh token, for refreshing, we're going to call it token, then / refresh, like so, / right? Then the class is called token refresh view, so it's token refresh. So there's no error here, so probably I've made a mistake here as well. So it's called token refresh view, right? So since it is a class, we need to put as view here, right? So as view, and then the name of this view, I'm going to call it, let's say token underscore refresh. All right, like so, right? So now that we have actually added our views, right? Let's go ahead and save this up, right? And let's go to my terminal just to make sure that there are no errors, right? So there are no errors, right? So now let's simulate the client now, right? So we are now the client, right? The client wants to access or to generate a JSON web token, right? So how do they do that? So just like what it did with the REST framework token, you just simply do the same thing, right? Except that maybe for this time we are simply hitting a different URL, right? So let's simply go ahead and do that, right? So we are simply going to hit our curl, right, with the username and then the password, and again it's going to be a post request, right? Then inside the post requests, right, so the URL is now called token, like so, right? Then then probably I need to put JSON. I need to prettify my response underscore pp, like so. All right. So as you can actually see, our requests, our get obtain token request is what, right? So one thing that you can notice is the JSON web token obtain token, it has responded with two tokens, right? There's one token called refresh, right? And then there's another token called the access token. That's why the view is called obtain per view, because we are returning two tokens, right? So to make our request, our subsequent request, the client now is supposed to attach this access token here, right? And then this access token, it has a time that it elapses, right? So by default, the simple JSON web token, the access token, it only laps for 5 minutes, right? By default, right? So which means it's actually said that after 5 minutes, this token will expire. So which means if you try to make the request after 5 minutes, it will actually deny you the request, right? Why? Because the token would have expired, right? So let's test it out, right? So I'm simply going to copy the token before 5 minutes, right? Then there's a refresh token here, right? So the refresh token now, so if the access token is expired, you need to actually make another request using this path, the token token refresh, right? Then what the refresh token does is it actually renew your access token. So if you hit this request, it will actually return a new access token, right? So the refresh is for renewing the expired access token. That's it. So that's why the JWT provides you with these two tokens, right? So let's simply test the access token for now, right? So I'm simply going to look for a request with a header, so this one, right? So I'm simply going to make the get request again, right? So this time I'm going to copy this access token, copy, right, and I paste it here. So copy, Control Shift V. All right, then boom. All right, so which means by now our token is already expired, so it's now saying invalid token, right? No, it hasn't expired. I think there's one thing that I forgot to mention. So one thing that I forgot to mention is every time you make the request, right? So here, instead of saying token, right, for the JSON web token, you don't say token here, you say bearer, right? So here you say bearer because this is now a bearer token, right? So boom. All right, so like this. So instead of putting the keyword token like what we did for the REST framework token, here you put bearer, right? As you can see, it has returned 200 our response as well, and this is still an empty array. All right, so this is how you do it. So here let's try to actually go ahead and make a post request with the data that we need, right? So maybe before I make a post before I make a post request, let's just simply try to simulate this refresh token part of it, right? So let me clear my terminal, right? So the access token, we have seen it that it's working, right? So how about the refresh token? So with the refresh token, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, since I didn't copy the refresh token, so for the refresh token you need to make a post request again, but this case, in terms of the data that you need to do to provide for your request, right? In this case, you need to put the the refresh token as the data, right, to actually be able to make the refresh request, right? So here I'm going to obtain the token again, right, because I want to copy this refresh token. And also one thing that I forgot to mention is this refresh token is valid, right, is valid for 24 hours, right, by default, right? So unlike the access token, which is valid for 5 minutes, the refresh token is valid for 24 hours, right? So now let's try to make a refresh token to get a token, right? So I'm going to make a curl request again, right? So curl this time this time is going to be a post request, right? It's going to be a post request, right? Then the data that we need to pass is the data that we need to pass is, so I'm going to put refresh here, right? You need to put the data inside refresh, right? So this is the refresh token, and then I simply close this up. All right, then after I've done that, then I need to put my endpoint, so it's http://localhost 8000 API/token/refresh/ like so. Refresh field is required. All right, so what did I do wrong? So inside my data, right? So since this is now an object, so I think maybe I need to pass the header as an object, right? Because as it stands right now, it's not an object, right? So for my data, after posts, right, maybe I can put a header, right, with some content type. So the content type, I'm going to say content dash type. Content type, it's going to be application. It's going to be application JSON. Then I close this up. Then here, refresh. Let me just make 2 brackets here, like so. Right, so this data is supposed to be in single quotes, so let me just put them in single quotes, right? Then I close them at the end here. So this is just a cool way of doing it. A little bit hectic. All right, so as you can actually see that we now made our post request. We have provided the refresh token that we get the first time to get the new access token. So this is our new access token, right? So which means we can now make some more requests using this one. All right, so guys, up to this point, I'm confident that maybe for example, if you use a Postman and try to push some data, because here we've been working with an empty list, right? So if you use Postman and actually go ahead and try to push data and make the request again, instead of getting an empty list, you'll actually get your data. So you guys can actually go ahead and do that. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I think this is it. So if you have reached this far, guys, congratulations. This is it. You are now able to actually go ahead and secure your endpoints using Django REST framework and Django REST framework with some JSON web tokens. So this is how you do it, guys. Just thought that maybe this would be helpful. So if you found this tutorial helpful, just please make sure you like the video and subscribe. And if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, let's move on. So in the next part of this tutorial, now that we have tested our API, everything is working, our REST framework, our JSON web token is working, everything is now more secure. I think it's probably time to jump into the next section, right? So the next section that we will now want to jump into is to actually go ahead and perform some unit testing on our API. So you guys just stay tuned and see you in the next one.